Eliminate the draconian city taxes on people and businesses. Give people and businesses a reason to stay in New York, because once they leave, you're not getting them back.
3.5 million people left New York City in 2020. Endless lockdowns, riots, crime. This city is abandoned. Imagine trying to run a supermarket here. But the Morton Williams chain won't give up. 75 years of history, 16 stores, and one team determined to survive. Avi Kaner, real pleasure to have you with NTD Business again.
Oh, nice to see you again, Paul.
We finally put an end to, you closed the door in 2020. You know, as we mentioned earlier, Black Swan event, really something I think nobody was expecting or could have imagined would be possible to happen. We see the vaccine rollout happening, lots of people very excited. We see record profits at places like Amazon, CVS, Johnson & Johnson, record high stock markets we've never seen before. Optimism among small business owners is really, you could say, near record lows or historically low. Why is that?
That's a great point. It's really the small business person that has suffered the most in 2020. And when you think that 2021 rolls around and we have the vaccine now and it's like flipping a light switch and everything gets better immediately, that's not the case. It's a very slow process. It was much faster. It was much faster to shut down the economy and close everything down than it will be to reopen. There have been paradigm shifts where people have changed the way they work, they travel, they remote learn, they going to school. And even when things reopen, it will not go back to the way it was 100%. And certainly will take time to get there. In our case, we're in Manhattan. You think of the supermarket industry in the United States as theoretically doing very well during this pandemic. In our case, it's just the opposite. Manhattan has been a very challenging place to be a business person. And it's not just for supermarket owners, it's for any business in New York City, in Manhattan. Why is that? It started with businesses shutting down after April. For example, we're sitting now in an office in Midtown Manhattan surrounded by office buildings, and we have a supermarket right below us. This supermarket is down 40%. Now, while it's down 40%, it still remains open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to meet the needs of the community. The problem is the community is far less populated than it was a year ago. Not only are the commuters gone, but millions of commuters are gone, but there are literally no tourists. Hotels are shuttered. Schools are shut down. We have a store at Columbia University, for example, where business last year was down 50%. Now, school was open, but it was all remote learning as opposed to in person. Now, when you take that depletion of population, apply it across all businesses suffer. I go to get my shoes shined on Broadway, and I feel so sorry for the lady who runs and owns that little store. Her business is probably down 80% because people are not wearing shoes, nice shoes to go out, and they're certainly not coming into work. And restaurants have suffered tremendously with the bans on dining, as well as even if restaurants were open now for dining, inside the restaurants, the people are not here. So we had the businesses, hotels, institutions shut down in April. Then we saw, as the summer approached, people with means in more affluent areas of the city who had, for example, weekend homes, close to 100% of them left and to their weekend homes, to just live in their weekend homes. And many of them decided to just stay there, right, which was unheard of in the past. They'd normally come back on Labor Day Now they've stayed there. There's really very little reason to come back to New York City with everything being closed. So here we're in 2021. People have not come back. In fact, more people have left. Once again, people with means, for example, people in their 50s who thought maybe they'll end up going to Florida 20 years from now, have rented apartments in Florida now. And their entire social group is there, their friends, their children. They've taken their children with them. Their children are working remotely. The students are studying remotely. And as a result, there's literally no population, very little population left in certain neighborhoods of the city. And you go at night, the best way to see it is at night. You look up at the buildings and you look at how the buildings are lit up. You might see only 30% of the lights turned on in a building, and that tells you the people are away.
So you've been able to weather the storm so far. What was it you had put in place? How had you structured the business to prepare for something like we're seeing at the moment?
Great question. I once heard a famous banker had this expression that when he built his bank to weather a 100-year storm, like a boat, right? If you build a boat and suddenly 5 years from now a big storm comes in and the boat gets destroyed, your business is destroyed. I believe it was probably Edmund Safra who said that. And we try to do the same thing in our business. I mean, we try to be diversified. We try to have the best people at all levels, not only at store level, dealing with the store, but also at the executive level. We have 7 or 8 professional executives who are so in tune with the market and are adapting literally on a daily basis to ensure that we prosper and survive. And if we go back, I'll give you some examples. When the pandemic hit, people thought the world was ending. They thought supplies would cease coming in to the city. You saw scenes of hoarding across the United States and around the world. Panic shopping. And in March and April of 2020, we witnessed that in New York City. We've never seen anything like that before. And there was tremendous fear also. Fear, customers had fear, our employees were fearful. We had our executives ensure that supplies came in to New York. An example, when truck drivers from New Jersey decided not to drive supplies into New York during the early days of the pandemic because of the danger of coming into New York, I had to actually contact a friend of mine who's a congresswoman to reach out to Mike Pence's office to communicate with the CDC to ensure that the trucks come into the city. And thank God we did. Imagine the millions of people in New York who would not have been able to get provisions. And, so it was really at every level. You have, during this time of tremendous fear and uncertainty, most of our employees, you look at cashiers, stock clerks, they're young. They're maybe in their early 20s mostly. A lot of them live at home or live with their grandparents. And there was such tremendous fear and uncertainty, and they knew that they were coming in to work. They were essential employees. They were coming into work. They were seeing thousands of people a day, right? And then they were coming home to their parents and grandparents and potentially bringing the COVID home with them. Yet our employees were absolutely wonderful. They came into work every day. We had very few people decide not to come into work. In March and April, the demand was so great, and we needed to ensure the stores kept operating, that we hired hundreds of new employees to be able to deal with the volume. And that volume ground to a halt very quickly, and we turned negative. But we remembered our employees and how diligent and passionate they were about helping our customers and the communities and neighborhoods. And we laid off absolutely no one. We kept every single employee. We have not hired many new employees since then. Through attrition, our numbers have come down. But we did not lay off even one employee.
How were you able to guide your team through last year? Was it a new challenge for you?
Last year was more than a challenge. It was 365 challenges. Literally every single day there was a challenge. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it did get worse. Something happened. And you just didn't know where it would come from. One example are the riots and the looting that took place in the summer. No one saw this coming. And, we had to, once again, protect the supply chain of getting merchandise into the stores. Right? Distributors didn't want to come into New York with the possibility of looting. Employees were afraid to come into work. Stores, we have stores. Half of our stores open 24 hours a day, 365 days a week.
Did you open during these riots?
We were open during the riots until the city put a curfew in place and we closed. Like for some stores, we didn't even know where the key was for the door. But we made it. We made it through that difficult time. But unfortunately, when the stores did reopen after the riots, business was depleted. Even people without means in the city who don't have vacation homes to go to, like people in their 20s and 30s who live in Manhattan, moved back in with their parents in the suburbs. They've slowly started to come back. Those people have slowly started to come back, but many have bought homes now or rented homes in the suburbs. There was over a few month period after the riots in New York, every street corner had a moving truck. At the same time, the real estate market in the suburbs has boomed, while Manhattan has been decimated.
And on New York, you've been doing business here for a long time. How have you seen, even before 2020, let's go back a little bit, how have you seen the business environment change here over time? Well, with regards to anything, how business friendly it's been, how different policies have impacted the city, how business has been in general.
Well, first of all, we love New York. We love being in New York. We've been here for over 60 years. It's really who we are. It's our soul is New York. But I could tell you, New York is an extremely difficult place to do business in. It is not business friendly. The policies, the regulations, the taxation is draconian taxation. I'll give you an example. We have a store on 63rd Street and 3rd Avenue where we pay $3 million a year rent, okay? Which is, it's not sustainable. I mean, the customers are all gone now. A lot of customers are in Florida or somewhere else. So that is not sustainable. So what does New York City do? New York City taxes us. We're the tenant, paying $3 million a year rent. New York City taxes us a rent tax that we have to pay. We're the ones paying the rent to a landlord, but the city taxes us for the privilege of paying $3 million a year rent.
When did this tax come in? This is a new thing?
Decades ago.
Decades ago.
Decades ago, and it only applies in Manhattan, I believe below 96th Street. It's targeted specifically at businesses like ours who are now suffering the most. And it is not sustainable. It can't go on. I mean, you go up and down 3rd Avenue and Broadway, stores are empty, they're vacant, for rent sale, for lease signs up.
And did we see any kind of tax relief last year to kind of help people get through the year? Or
We saw absolutely zero tax relief from New York. Nothing. And in fact, it's become, adding insult to injury, we have a proliferation of peddlers now, like produce peddlers and other peddlers have set up shop directly in front of many of our stores, flouting the law, like double the size they're allowed to be, parking illegally in front of our stores so our trucks can't make deliveries. New York City then comes and gives tickets to our trucks who are double parking because they can't park in front of our stores. And New York City refuses to enforce anything against this type of situation. Another major problem we're having is theft. We have never seen this level of theft in New York City. And I have some empathy, towards these people. Everyone's hurting. But there are professionals who are taking advantage of the situation. They know the police no longer responds to shoplifting. And they can literally, professional thieves can walk into a store, say with a big Target bag, fill it up with meat or other expensive items, and walk out the door. Because of COVID, they realize there will be no physical altercations. We're not going to physically try to stop them.
You've seen this happening with a big Target
bag. It happens every day. Yeah, it happens every day with the Target bags and
so they'll come in
bags.
with the bag in hand, shop as me or you would normally shop, and then just leave the store, bypass the cashier.
That's right. It happens every day. We've had to spend a lot more money now, payroll money, on hiring security guards for the store. So although business has been decimated in New York, we now have to spend even more on payroll to hire security guards. Otherwise, we won't be able to remain in business. Our margins, supermarket margins, net margins are so thin to begin with, and especially in Manhattan due to the high rents and these draconian taxes, electrical costs and labor costs. There's like nothing left over. So this theft can make a profitable store not profitable.
Where would you make changes if you were able to have a magic wand and suddenly say, where is the biggest problem at the moment as a business owner?
Well, you need a very big magic wand, but it's doable. But the magic wand has to be in the hands of the right individuals, right? We need leadership. We need political leadership that looks outside the box, that looks at the private sector, that looks at places that are doing it well. New York should look at Florida and Texas and ask itself, well, why are people moving there? You saw Goldman Sachs just announced today record earnings, right? So even with these record earnings and everyone working remotely from home, they're looking to move to Florida or Texas, probably Florida. New York has to ask itself why. So many companies will follow suit.
And speaking with your peers and maybe even yourselves, I'm not sure, it's a little bit difficult to relocate, your supermarkets, but are there people who are actively considering leaving even today?
Yeah, so our stores, our supermarket chain is brick and mortar. We have our chain, our average store has a 20 to 30-year lease. So it's very difficult to just turn a switch and, it's easier for Goldman Sachs to relocate to Florida than it would be for Morton Williams to relocate to Florida. Although many of our customers have moved to Florida, maybe we should follow them. But it's not that easy because we have the physical presence. But I could tell you, as leases come up and as option periods come up on leases, we'd never had to think this way before, of thinking of actually not renewing leases, not renewing options. In fact, the store we're in now, 57th Street and 6th Avenue, right? If I told you the rent we're paying here, you'd fall off your chair.
I can imagine.
But we were able to pay that rent when there were people here, and office buildings were filled. Those days are over. The people will come back to these office buildings, but it will not be at 100% occupancy the way it was. And even tourism, we're surrounded by hotels here. Tourists will eventually come back to New York if there's a reason to come back to New York, right? They've discovered that there are other places they can go to where they can relax and easier to get to and less expensive. So once again, what New York needs is real leadership and looking outside the box to bring people back in.
How difficult has it been as an independent business to try and take advantage of technology and innovate while competing with these, multinationals or big companies? How difficult has it been for you guys to innovate?
So competing with internet businesses has been very difficult in the city. And one of the reasons it's been difficult is because of city policies. And I'll give you an example. You go on Amazon, you order toothpaste on Amazon, right? It'll come in a box. There'll be a tube of toothpaste in it. It'll have like plastic bubble wrap inside of it. It'll be delivered on a truck, a FedEx truck, a UPS truck, or an Amazon truck that will park out on the street, deliver the box to you, right? So meanwhile, they're producing the waste, the fumes, yet they're not paying the taxes we're paying. The example I gave you before of 63rd and 3rd, the $3 million in taxes, New York City's cut of that $3 million, are you ready for this? Is $1 million.
No.
$1 million of the $3 million goes to New York City.
No.
Okay?
That's incredible.
Amazon, that has its warehouses outside of New York City, can drive its trucks in, do the business in New York City, but is not subject to the taxes we are. So you ask yourself, why would brick and mortar stay in New York City? The people are gone. The taxes are out of control. There should be no taxes on let the state tax businesses. New York City should not be taxing businesses. So there's no simple solution, but what's for sure is that we need better leadership.
When you raise these concerns, are there ears there to hear you? What's the response?
So we've had meetings with city council members, and they'll show empathy, but the answer is no. There are really no. It's the goose that lays the golden egg. It's you tell a government to reduce taxes is it's like looking outside during the day and saying it's nighttime. They'll laugh at you. I mean, they may try to be empathetic, but changing that is very difficult.
It's a very short-term way of looking at things, though, right? It's going to hurt them in the long term.
You're absolutely right. New York City has a tendency to look at everything on a short-term basis. Not on politicians look at things that will help them today, that will get them the votes today, right? What they need to do is think more like businesses think. When we do our planning, we do 5-year projections. The city should be doing a 20-year projection of how to get people back, businesses back, institutions back, tourism back. And they're doing literally none of that. I mean, they're seeing, the numbers don't lie. And there has been a paradigm shift. And now is the time to, if you wait too long to make changes, it'll be even more difficult to get them back. here's a lesson, Business School 101 lesson. Business School 101 is customer retention is a lot easier and less expensive than customer acquisition. So if you have a customer and you do things right by the customer and the customer stays with you and is loyal to you, continues to spend money in your business, applies to municipalities and cities like New York. They should focus on customer retention as opposed to customer acquisition. When the time comes for New York City and everyone leaves New York and they look at, oh, how do we get people back? That's acquisition as opposed to retention. And it's nearly impossible to do. People will become more entrenched in where they are. They'll buy homes. They'll have office space in Westchester or Connecticut or Florida or Texas. To get them to leave that and come back and get back on Metro North and commute every day for an hour and a half each way, to just pay more taxes and spend less time with their families, is a difficult, if not impossible, challenge. That's why the city can't wait. The city has to move now, figure out now how to retain its businesses and people. It needs to immediately eliminate the city taxes that are driving people away. If the city eliminated the city taxes, leave the state taxes in place, of course, and the property taxes and that sort of thing, but eliminate the draconian city taxes on people and businesses. Give people and businesses a reason to stay in New York, because once they leave, you're not getting them back.
So you've tried to build your ship to weather a 100-year storm. If we don't see these changes that you're calling for, we need to implement, will you be able to weather it for much longer?
I could tell you that the nature of the ship might have to change, and it may become a much smaller ship. And we'll weather the storm, but it may be in a smaller ship. Now, I'm a businessman. I thrive on growth. In fact, we're negotiating for a new supermarket location now in Manhattan, but I don't know if I want to go through with it. Like in normal times, I'd be hounding the landlord, meeting him or her for dinner, talking on the phone, getting the deal done, getting the lawyers together, making the deal happen. Now we're letting week after week go by, and it's because the reality is that we don't know if we want to even be there now. Unless we see changes in the city, I don't know what we'll look like in the future, but it might be smaller than we are now.
It's the uncertainty that's really the killer. Yeah.
The uncertainty and the lack of leadership.
Well, Avi, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Paul. Thank you.